Welcome everybody back to Catechumens Depart. I'm Eric Anderson. I'm an artist and a parishioner of Father Mark's.
I'm Father Mark Kozak from the Assumption of the Holy Virgin Orthodox Church here in South Philadelphia.
Thank you. It's good to see you guys again. Thank you for joining us. Last week we ended on a note and Father Mark told us a little story about Saint Innocent and his vision of heaven. I'd like to pick up there this week. Can you repeat that story in case somebody wasn't with us?
Repeat the story?
I know.
Okay.
It's a rerun, guys. Sorry.
Saint Innocent wasn't just the Bishop of Alaska. He became Bishop of the eastern part of Siberia. And he was on a trip with the Dean of Kamchatka, which is the peninsula right next to Alaska, and a deacon, and they were stopped at someone's house when doing Divine Liturgy, and after Divine Liturgy, the deacon is standing at the window, and he keeps looking away from the window, and he keeps moving his head away, and the other deacon asks the bishop, what is heaven and hell like? And the bishop asked the deacon that was at the window, said, what are you doing? He says, well, the light is too much. I'm moving my head away from the light. And he said, you just described what heaven and hell is. You're in the same place. Heaven is you can take the light. Hell is you can't take it. And you spend an eternity with that.
Thank you.
So there's another story, which I also alluded to.
Okay.
I'm not going to go into details because I want you all to read the book. So many of you probably have read the Chronicles of Narnia, and the Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, and everything else. And and everybody doesn't remember the last book because it's 7 books. I mean, we're Americans. I mean, reading 7 books at one time that are only that thin. Well, read The Last Battle.
I have.
That's that book. And it's all about heaven and hell. And it's about who believes and who doesn't believe. And it also defines belief, according to C.S. Lewis, which is very close to being Orthodox.
Yeah.
It's a very, very good definition of especially belief.
Yeah. That's a great book.
And the end is great.
Yeah, it really does.
It's a wonderful ending.
We can't spoil it for people.
I can't spoil it for you. You're going to have to read it. Because reading is good.
Well, and then when you get done with that, you can read The Great Divorce. And then when you get done with that, you can read The Abolition of Man. It's sort of like, it's all the, if you really want to.
And once you read about 5 or 6 C.S. Lewis's, then you can read the Space Trilogy. Because that is
or should you just start there? I don't know.
No.
You start with Narnia.
Yeah, start with Narnia. Yeah, reading the Space Trilogy, you've got to have a little bit of science fiction, a little bit of cosmology.
Yeah.
A whole bunch of theology and a whole bunch of Arthurian legends sort of mixed in there for you to get what the Space Trilogy is all about. No,
you're right. I read those a few times as a kid, and they kind of, like, I liked them because they were aliens, and then I would get to that hideous strength and be like, why don't even know what this is?
They get to the last one, and people go like, what is this all about? Well, it's all about Arthur. It's all about Merlin. It's all about the old magic. It's all about... all 3 of them are all about a cosmology that is really intriguing.
Yeah,
it's good. Really it's a good story.
It is.
But there's a lot of truth in those stories.
Yeah.
And similar to Narnia, but not as direct.
I wish there were. I don't know of any like actual Orthodox fiction writers.
This is a problem that we have in at least in English, because we don't have. I remember talking about 34 years ago with some friends of mine in school, and about some people wanting to be, the first Orthodox fiction writer and everything else. I mean, why don't we have Orthodox nun stories? I mean, really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
It's not like we don't have thousands of nuns. We did invent it, or we have Father Brown stories and other stories from England in the 1900s. We have Trollope, who spends his entire 6-part series on the Barset Chronicles on just about clergy families, which is a wonderful book. And we have a just almost nothing. We have the Cathedral Folk by Leskoff, which is a translation from the Russian story about 19th century Russian little cathedral town, and a few other little things.
Yeah.
But we don't have anything else, which is really sad, because all of these stories are out there.
Yeah.
And it's not like we don't have the stories. We have this. We all know a nun, and hopefully we'll get her.
We'll reel in our nun. We'll reel her in.
And what I would just like to do is just to sit her here and say, Mother Catherine, why don't you tell us a few stories?
Yeah.
For about a half an hour.
Yeah.
And then for the next 5 months. No.
I know, right? She's got a lot of stories.
But it's,
I wonder.
It's like a blank.
Well.
And do we need to record some of the stories that we have? I think probably we do. I think that probably we do need to talk about people that we know in church and people that are not necessarily clergy, but who are leading a Christ-like life and trying to approach Theosis. I'll mention the word, which means not becoming God, but becoming God-like. So we have to be careful of how we use the word. But it's not our form of salvation in the Orthodox Church, it's our form of life in the Orthodox Church. Because you have to remember the axiom of Father Alexander Schmemann, who I think borrowed this from someone, I'm sure he did, that Jesus would be shocked to find out that Christianity would be considered as a sect. He would be more shocked to find out that Christianity would be considered a religion. And more shocked to find out that it would be considered a way of life. But the only way of defining Christianity is it is life itself with Christ, which is what theosis is. And that's what it's about. It's about life, period. So we don't have the sacred and the profane. We just have life with Christ. We don't have, we have lots of gray areas here, Father, between this and that. I'll have a little white lie and a little sin and a big sin, or the 7 cardinal sins and everything else. None of that exists in Orthodox theology. If it's a pathway. If it is there, it's come from somewhere else. So we don't differentiate. When we talk about theosis, we're talking about becoming godlike. That's what prayer is for. That's what divine liturgy is for. That's what reading the gospel is for. That's what being a Christ-like person is for. Right.
And when you say godlike, you don't mean like I'm going to become like this all-powerful being with lightning bolts in the sky and smiting and blah.
I'm not going to become God.
It's closer. It's an ever-drawing nearer.
Well, what it is it goes back to Gregory Palamas. He defined it the best, but other people defined it before that. Other folks defined our relationship to God is through His energies, not through His essence. So to become God would be a God number 4,443. No, we don't have a pantheon of people becoming God.
I think that 4,443. I think his name is like Joe.
Yeah, I think his name is Joe.
Joe the God.
Yeah. So so we have to be careful once again in defining terms. So people throw theosis around, and it's like, well, let's read a few things. Let's pray about this. And then we can sort of talk a little bit about theosis, and then we can talk about a little bit how it works for monastics, and then we can talk about how it works for the rest of us that live in the world and have to relate to the world every day. And then we can talk about the ins and outs of it, and this is like a lifetime of learning, and it goes along with our salvation. Our salvation is a lifetime of salvation. It's not a point of salvation. Yes, we all get all Orthodox Christians are chrismated and baptized, but they were becoming Orthodox before that.
Yeah. That's like a marker along the
so
the way.
It's a marker, but it's not like, you and I have talked about this, not jokingly, unfortunately, but it's not like June 14th, 1973, which is, I think, the day that I, found Jesus Christ in a Assembly of God youth group. So you had to write that down in your Bible. Right. And that was the date that you wrote down.
Well, and I think that's
the day I was saved.
Yeah.
Which is not, that has, Orthodox theology has no, that's just not how it works for us.
That's because it's not dualistic in the same way, which we talked a bunch about in our earlier lessons. It's like we are in the process of becoming, of being saved, rather than I was saved at this point. But that's, in some ways, that's a rejoinder or an escape from maybe that dualism, that judicial, like I was saved from my sin or the wrath of God or whatever at X, and now like I'm okay. Which that gets into all kinds of thorny stuff that I ran into as a kid, because I was like, I'm saved, now what?
Well, and that's the question is I'm saved, and the Orthodox question would be, well, what's going to happen tomorrow? Yeah. What are you going to be like to the people around you tomorrow? What relationship are you going to have with Jesus Christ tomorrow? Yeah.
It is that. It's precise. It's that. It's a different kind of relational model.
Yeah. So it's looking at our relationship to God as I don't want to use the word holistic, because that has its own cultural overtones to it. Right. Or the whole person, but we're talking about the whole person.
Right. I think maybe some reclaiming, or again, defining terms, right? That's like properly defining that term. It is. That's one of the things that has always, even from the start, attracted me to Orthodoxy, is that and it's always difficult, but that is the correct word to use, is that it is holistic. It addresses the entire person. It's not like, all right, sins are forgiven, now it
isn't the box checking. Yeah. Or, okay, I have my, most of the time when we use box Christianity is that we have, for many people, is that we have our Christian box, which considers going, to church on a certain day of the week, or praying at a certain time of the day. Yeah. And we put all these little boxes together, and that's our religious box. And we have that.
Which fits into our box of Tuesday or life,
whatever else like we have, other
our compartmentalized sort of.
Well, in Orthodoxy, there is no box, so there's no confining that.
Right. Consequently, salvation or heaven or whatever isn't like this weird. Right. I wonder if that's why. Like, even thinking of great Russian writers who were Orthodox, like Dostoevsky or whoever, it's like, those stories aren't fantastical. Now, there's a bunch of Russian fairy tales, which I don't know much about. In fact, there's a fellow named Deacon Nicholas Kotar who's doing a lot of work in that zone, along with he's up at Jordanville Father Andrew Stephen Damick out in Lehigh, they're sort of like trying to work on this problem of like what, like, but I wonder if it's easier to write speculative fiction if you live in a dualistic paradigm, right? Because you're already like the spiritual is separate, so then you can sort of like but then that's not true either, because look at all the great mythology that Lewis was referencing, right? That's all coming from a non-dualist sort of place.
Yeah, I mean, you look at, the sources for Lewis and Tolkien and Williams and the rest of the Inklings and others.
Yeah.
And the Kalevala, the Finnish epic saga. George MacDonald's writings. There's all kinds of things that are there where you read The Lord of the Rings, you read C.S. Lewis's writings, and you go, that is so close to being Orthodox. That's so close.
Yeah.
And much of it is Orthodox without trying to like wedge it in.
Yeah, like,
which is what a lot of people want to do with Orthodoxy. Well, we'll sort of wedge that one in.
And here's some saints. Like, that's weird. That doesn't really. Yeah, like,
but no. I mean, when you read, I think I've talked to, maybe I haven't talked to you guys about it, but I've talked to in sermons sometimes about the whole idea of subcreation.
Yes, that's a Tolkienian thing from on fairy tales.
Yeah. And he wrote this essay in 1935 on fairy tales, and he talks about being a subcreator.
Yeah.
And but a subcreator that's connected with the creator, not separate. Right. That's the difference between what Tolkien is talking about, what we should be approaching in our Theosis journey, to, I'm a great human being, or I'm not a great human being, but I subcreated this, so I'm a subcreator, so I made this block of strange looking wood for Kim.
That's a true thing. He did make that block of strange looking wood for Kim.
I'm a subcreator separate from God? And no, you can't.
Then you'd be like an also creator, or not really even a co-creator, but you'd be like, yeah.
Then you run into deism. Right. And we
then
have...
you're God number 43792.
Exactly. Yeah. And that is such an easy trap in our culture. And this is a trap for good people. I mean, I'm not talking about there are a bunch of evil people walking around out there, and they're all evil, and it's like, no, I'm talking about the best of us. And sometimes we make the biggest mistakes, and that's one of them, is to take that jump, which we've talked a lot about on and off, of making man into God.
It's hard in a disenchanted world not to accidentally do that, because we swim in that soup of secularism or materialism or whatever, however you want to call it. And it's like you're taught, at least in my generation and onward, that like you need to be your best self, you need to find your creative vision, express yourself, do your thing, and it's,
which is almost right.
It's almost right, but it's like,
not plugged into where it needs to be plugged into.
Right.
And that's 2,000 years of Christianity. Yeah. That's another 1,000+ years of the Jewish faith. That's all of the good Greek philosophers, all of the various faith groups that became lifted up in Christianity in the first 300 to 500 years of Christianity. All of that and so much more. That's what you have to plug into. Because if you don't plug into that, then you're a deist.
Right. And ultimately, your thing is going to wither.
And it's going to wither because it has to do with you.
Right. It becomes the, what is it, the Ouroboros? Is that the snake that eats its tail?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
You're your own power source, and you're going to run out of juice pretty fast.
Yeah.
And then you wind up being the deacon who's shying away from the light, I think.
Exactly. And this is when you push people away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now a small minority of people are wired to be to be monks and nuns and to go out into the wilderness, which we need more of. Mm-hmm. We need 1,000 more monks and nuns in America today.
Yeah.
We need the equal of other Orthodox churches that have monastics today. Mm-hmm. Not only because, there are examples and everything, and they're better Christians than we are. It's not like a contest, It's what they wear more black, so they're better. It's like
I gotta step it up. You're wearing more black than I am.
I'm wearing more black.
Well, you're the priest. You're supposed to be ahead of me.
But it's with a vibrant monastic life in a community. Mm-hmm. This means me as a parish priest, I can send you off to a female monastery to hang out with the nuns for a while. I can send you off to a male monastery to hang out with the monks for a while.
Yeah.
Or you could visit regularly. I mean, when my wife and I go to Georgia, especially when my wife goes to Georgia.
The country
of Georgia. She basically visits churches and monasteries and various friends, many of whom are monks and nuns. Mm-hmm. And she's doing that for a not an active, I'm going to go learn from them and sit at their feet and drink in all their wisdom.
Yeah.
It's being around them. How do they pray? I mean, at one time I went up to one of the older cathedral towns in Georgia. There were 12 of them, the 12 original dioceses of the Georgian Church. Mm-hmm. And the bishop there is a very close friend of ours. And, I've been Orthodox a long time. I've been to many monasteries and everything else. But I said to myself, well, I'm 150 feet away from church. I really ought to show up to all the monastic stuff. I really ought to show up to church. So one day I did that. 18 hours later, mm-hmm. I added it all up in one day. It was 18 hours. And I'm like, I could probably do this, but it would be really hard.
It's a lot. I'm reading.
I mean, to do the monastic, that's the monastic liturgical prayer life.
Right. That's their normative practice.
And then they work.
Yeah.
At a job that they're doing.
Yeah.
And then they pray themselves.
Yeah.
So we need 1,000 people that are doing this.
Yeah.
In America.
Yeah.
Instead of however many hundred that we have.
And then, I mean, how does that, right, to go back to that theosis idea, like how does that help? Well, I think that's pretty clear how that helps them move closer to Christ. But how does that help the world at large grow on its path towards God?
Number one, they pray for the world continually. Mm-hmm. That's their job, is to pray. But also, those of us that come to see them, they might bring us back to a place where we need to be on the road to theosis. Mm-hmm. They might remind us of a place where we were at before that was a good place to be. Mm. They might say, come to all the services, like the bishop told me, just come to all the services. Or you don't really have to. Yeah, which means come to all the service.
Yeah, that means, yeah.
That means you better.
But I'm going to...
You should come. Yeah, that's what that means.
Yeah.
And so they offer spiritual direction that has become the domain of priests and bishops.
Yeah.
Where I don't really think a lot of it belongs there.
Yeah.
Because in many places you could go up to the mountaintop and go to the monastery and talk to Father so-and-so or Mother so-and-so, and that would be, they would be your spiritual father or spiritual mother.
So you, as a priest, wouldn't be pulling double, triple, quadruple
duty. So I wouldn't
duty.
be doing like 8 things.
Yeah.
And confessions are hard because I pray for people to come back on the road to Theosis. I hope I strengthen them. I hope I haven't put them to sleep. But even after doing this for almost 40 years, I learned something new every time, every confession. Usually one of my short callings. One of the reasons why I didn't want to become a priest was the confession thing.
Really? Yeah. I would think it would be really...
it was daunting.
Yeah.
And at 26, it was really daunting.
Oof.
At 63, it can be daunting.
You've probably run the gamut of hearing a lot of...
Well, I was lucky. I was in the Navy for 20 years, so I heard more things than...
You heard all the things.
I could say I heard all the things, but that's not true.
But a lot of the things.
I heard a lot. But what monastics do is they do all of these things, and they work. They have a private prayer life that's extraordinary. They have... many of them use the Jesus prayer as one of their not toolbox, because that's much many words that are used too much.
Yeah.
I take out my liturgy book, my toolbox, and my prayer rope, and and I have long hair and I have a beard, and that's going to make me Orthodox. Because I got all the tools. Well, no, because anybody can go down the store and...
Yeah, you can go to Home Depot and buy a table saw and get in some bad trouble with that thing.
Anyone can do that.
Yeah. You are not a carpenter because you have the table saw.
No.
Yeah.
And the idea, of course, with the prayer rope is to be able to come to a point where you don't need the prayer rope.
Right. It's like your training wheels, maybe?
But you can come back to it all the time, and you can use it all the time. I've even seen it used liturgically one time.
Really?
At the monastery, Orthodox monastery in Essex, England, the home of now Saint Sophrony. When I visited there back in 1988, and my wife and I went to visit there, and instead of doing the hours, they would do 500 knots on the prayer rope.
Okay.
In 4 or 5 different languages, because they used like 3 or 4 or 5 different languages there. So this is what they did. They modified their liturgical life into doing that, which is very interesting.
That's cool.
We still have Cenobitic monasteries in the world.
What does that word mean?
Well, there are people probably look and say, "Oh, there are only 2 kinds of monasteries. There's monasteries with monks and nuns, and there's 2 kinds of monastics: monastery, the communal monks and nuns
and hermits.
In a monastery, and hermits. Well, there was one in between, and what they did is they lived together in 8 to 10. Around 8 to 10 people, and they would pray together every day, and then go to the major services in the monastic, the main monastic church down the road a piece. And I've only been to one of those, and that was in Romania.
Okay.
And 10 nuns lived together in a house, and I forget how many houses they had. I think there were like 300 or 400 nuns there. And so it was pretty amazing. I wish they would have spoken more English so I could figure out, not figure out, but get it from them what their life was like. I mean, I've read about it.
Yeah.
But I hadn't
experienced
it.
Yeah. Well,
are we running out of time? Our director is pointing at
the director is pointing at the timer.
Sorry.
Well, that was fun. Thank you. We learned a bit about monasticism and creativity, and maybe you guys will be interested in reading that essay by Tolkien. It's
yes, please.
It's very useful. Again, it's called On Fairy Tales. Yep. It's really good. Look at those C.S. Lewis books.
And think about monasticism.
Yeah.
For those of you that are over like 20 or, don't think about it too young, because we're America here where our maturity rate is interesting. There was a reason why in the first century, in the first millennium of the church, that we had the age limits for clergy. For subdeacon it was 20, for deacon it was 25, for priest it was 30, and for bishop it was 35.
Makes sense.
Is because there were certain maturity levels and things to learn.
Yeah.
Well, my idea would be to bump them all up like 5 years or more.
In America?
In America.
For sure.
Well, in the West, probably.
In the West in general. Yep.
Yeah. But, because are there people ready at those sometimes before? Yes, but but the monastic life is a interesting life, and it's not an alternative to what we do here. It's a calling within itself.
Yeah.
Calling what we do here. I mean, you two were just crowned. You have a special calling, being a married Orthodox Christians here in America, right here in Philadelphia. And the monastic calling is a special calling, and we need more monks.
Yeah, so think about it.
And nuns. So
we'll get the nun on here one of these days.
And we need to get the nun on here, yes.
Anyhow, thank you guys. It's a pleasure to be joined by you as always, and until next time, catechumens depart.